Carl, first of all, thank you for that very, very generous introduction. It's really my pleasure to be here. I was looking forward to be here for, I guess, two reasons. One, to show my appreciation and acknowledge the courage of the 5 honorees that you have here today for their amazing work to advance anti-corruption in some very hostile environments. And secondly, Carl, I'm here because I'd do anything to get away from the Hill. If you could figure out a way to keep me here all day, I would appreciate it very much. My only regret is that you do have internet service here. If you didn't have that, didn't have to worry about getting a tweet from the president, I would feel even better. But it really is a pleasure to be here. And I had a chance to talk to the 5 individuals that you're going to hear from shortly before we came out today and listen to some of their courage and some of the things that they're doing. And I just thought for a moment that, yes, as Carl pointed out, I get acknowledgments for a lot of work that I do in regards to advancing human rights and anti-corruption and democratic principles. In reality, first I should acknowledge that I have extraordinary staff that do this on a daily basis and travel around the world to deal with these problems. So I do want to acknowledge Charlotte Oldham-Moore, who has been in the forefront on a lot of these bills. Algene Sajari, who's here also, who does incredible work. Jim Green. It's a team that has put together real efforts to see where we can advance American values around the world. So they really deserve a good deal of the credit. And then there's Jody Herman, who's your vice president, who I had the honor of having as my chief of staff when I first took on the responsibilities as the ranking Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I took over that responsibility in the middle of a major battle. And Jody's steady leadership on our committee staff allowed us to, I think, show one of the best moments of the United States Senate. And I thank her for her extraordinary help and leadership on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So we get acknowledged for what we do in the comfort of the United States of America. If you're going to take on battles, you do that because you believe it's right, but there's not a personal safety issue. The 5 people that you recognize today took extraordinary risks in stepping forward in their countries in order to advance what's right for their countries. So they're our heroes. They're the ones who really are making a difference. And I want to be here today to publicly acknowledge the inspiration you give each one of us. We're motivated by your actions and the risks that you've taken in Ukraine, Afghanistan, Guatemala, Angola, and Malaysia are not countries in which you are guaranteed your safety. And speaking out against the establishment doesn't always get you a pat on the back. It can get you a bullet. And that is courage that inspires all of us. Carl, I appreciate you acknowledging the 35th anniversary of President Reagan's remarks in UK. It was an inspirational moment about the infrastructure of democracy that led to NED. And NED has been an incredibly valuable resource that we have in America and in its global reach. And we thank you for that. And the 15th anniversary. I also want to acknowledge the 70th anniversary of the Marshall Plan. 70 years ago, the Marshall Plan was initiated. And it was a defining moment for America's engagement versus isolation. Prior to World War II, America thought that isolation would be acceptable. We then fought a very important war for democracy that was critically important to stop the types of atrocities that we saw around the world. But it was a very costly war. And the 2 years following World War II, the United States spent about $15 billion in emergency humanitarian assistance to help the people of Europe. It was the right thing to do. The Marshall Plan was a $13 billion investment. And it came with a commitment to rebuild Europe so we could have a strong transatlantic partnership. And it worked. What an investment that was. America's strength is in our ideals. The Marshall Plan was based upon our ideals to develop democratic countries and economic powers in Europe, and it worked. It was interesting that the Soviet Union decided not to join, and their form of government, communism and totalitarian and corrupt regimes, are still our challenge today. But we have a transatlantic partnership to fight that from a $13 billion investment. When we fight corruption, when we fight for democratic principles, it's who we are as a nation. It's the strength of America. America's strength is not in just our military or our economy. It's in the values that we stand for, of good governance, anti-corruption, human rights. And when we do that, it not only helps us from the point of view of who we are, but it also saves us resources. It's a lot less expensive, as General Mattis has said, Secretary Mattis has said now, to support our diplomatic efforts, our development assistance efforts, than to pay for soldiers and bullets. So all this is part of our engagement. And today we recognize that corruption very much affects our ability to carry out and maintain fundamental peace in the world. We know that because it intensifies economic and social inequalities. We know that it drains resources that should be used to help develop a nation through corruption. We know that it's an obstacle to democracy and rule of law, that it erodes citizens' trust. It leads to radical movements and insurgencies, and it threatens not only that country in which the corruption exists, the region and the global security. So for all those reasons, we understand the importance to fight corruption. About 10 months ago, I was invited to a National Security Council meeting in the White House, where the sole topic was fighting corruption, because the National Security Council recognized that corruption is a direct threat to America's national security. So we need to be aggressive. There's just too many cases around the world where corruption is way too prevalent. We know that in resource-rich countries with the resource curse, where the corruption is taking the resources away from the people. You have very, very wealthy countries with very high mortality rates because the people aren't getting the value of their own property, their own wealth. We know that America's provided great development assistance over the years. Afghanistan, one of the countries you're going to hear about, we know we had a history of a lot of our resources going to finance corruption rather than helping the people of Afghanistan. And we see today in Venezuela, a country that is on the verge of collapse, where corruption, we can't even get our humanitarian aid in without it being diverted for corruption. So we need to do a much better job. Now, I want to just be a little bit more optimistic here, because the people of the world recognize that they can change their country. We're going to hear a little bit about the Ukraine today, and I was in the Maidan shortly after the protest moment and saw the courage of people coming out and saying they did not want a corrupt regime. They were out there protesting. And more recently, we saw people show up in great numbers to protest the relaxation of campaign corruption laws in Romania. So we've seen that there is a movement among people to speak out against it. Carl mentioned what we've done in the United States in our leadership. I look at my position as the ranking Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to advance human rights and anti-corruption agenda. The Global Magnitsky Law will be a valuable tool, not just here in the United States, but it's being adopted by many countries around the world. It's becoming the standard. And that's what we are trying to do. And on our anti-corruption bill that I filed with Senator Perdue, a bipartisan bill, and by the way, the Magnitsky bill was filed with Senator McCain. We do this on a bipartisan basis because we can get things done when we work on a bipartisan basis. But in the anti-corruption bill, we're taking the best practices that we've seen work with the Trafficking in Persons report that was initiated by Congress. Quite frankly, many of our diplomats didn't want to be bothered with having to report on how trafficking was being handled in their host countries because it just gave them another burden in their diplomacy. But we said, look, modern-day slavery must end, and we did something about it. And we now have universal reporting. We have universal standards, we have minimum standards, we have tier rating, and it has consequences. And that's what we want to do with corruption. There are best practices. There are certain courses that countries must take in order to meet minimum standards. And we should give a global report so that all countries can do better. And those that are below the standards, there are consequences. We use all government approach, so we use our development assistance to help those countries fight corruption. That's what we do in trafficking. And I'm very much inspired to get this bill done in this Congress, and we're going to look for every way in which we can get that done. Now, I want to just conclude on the fact of the realities of what's happening here in America. We got challenges. There's strong interest in Congress among Democrats and Republicans to advance America's anti-corruption agenda, and we're going to do that. But it's difficult when the President of the United States, on the day he takes the oath of office, puts our country at risk on corruption by failing to comply with the emolument clause of the Constitution. This is the first president who felt he could maintain his business interests and still be president of the United States. We see so many corrupt leaders around the world who have maintained financial interests in the business of their country. And the United States must set that example. And when the president says, well, I can differentiate between my business interest and my interest as president, it raises a question as to whether the president will be effective in dealing with these issues around the world. When the president gets trademarks for his company in China or gets royalties in Turkey for his business interests, there's a hard to understand whether there is really a clear difference between his actions as president and the rewards his businesses are getting. But it goes deeper than that. Secretary Tillerson says that we may have to put aside our principles in order to get advancements with other countries. No, we never put aside our principles. That's America's strength, and we need to speak out about it. Or when the president says things that you don't know whether you can believe. I must tell you, I was outraged by the president's comments about the mayor of London. I can't get that out of my mind. The day after we should all have been together in unity against a horrible terrorist attack in London, and the mayor, who happens to be Muslim, is singled out by the president in a way that was just not what he said about fear among the people of London. That makes it more difficult for America to have that type of moral clarity and that type of leadership globally to fight corruption. And it means we all have to work harder. The strength of America is in the Constitution, we the people. It's we the people. And one thing that this administration has done is engaged a lot more people in the political process. Come to one of my town hall meetings. We all need to be more engaged. And we can do it from the comfort of the United States of America. So let our honorees that are here today inspire us to do more. And let us make sure that Congress does what's right. We're an independent branch of government. And let's make sure that we, the people, speak out for America's strength in fighting corruption here in America and around the world. Again, thank you all for what you do, and congratulations to the individuals that are here.